Hello, and welcome back. Today, I wanted to share a story with you. A story of James Barton Longacre. This is a man whose art designs for United States coins have continued to impact us for the past 170 years. He was a storyteller in metal, turning his contemporary America's values, symbols, into hopes and dreams and icons that fit in your pocket. The more I read up on him, the more I've grown to really like him, as he faced adversity time and time again, but he always came out on top. Now, one side note is that as a historian, I love good sources, yet he doesn't actually have much aside from being covered in chapters within numismatic histories, art dictionaries, archival collections, rather than having a solo biography or monograph, which, for a man who would influence the United States people for so many years, was a little sad. But the biographical sketches that I did find were very well put together and based on personal papers, diaries, and family notes, including input from his own son, Andrew. And I was inspired to look into the life of this man because recently on my channel I've been going through my own coin collection that I've never really searched through. Rolls of old pennies and nickels and things like that. And I found a lot of his work, and of course I'm a history nerd, so I had to look him up and I had to go down this rabbit hole that's been very enjoyable to learn about. And our story with James starts on a small farm in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. He was born August 11th, 1794, to his mother Sarah Barton Longacre and his father Peter Longacre. They were descendants of Swedish settlers in North America and were proud of that. However, early in his life, tragedy would strike and his mother Sarah would pass away. His father Peter did not take long to remarry, and life soon became intolerable for young James. Now, what it was about life that became so relatable for young James and Cinderella, we don't know. But the anecdotal story that's been passed down is that it had something to do with the stepmother. However, whatever it was dramatic, it was harsh, and it drove young James to run away from home at the age of 12 and go from Delaware County all the way to Pennsylvania, which, using modern-day roads, is a 5-hour walk. That's some dedication. I think I can safely say that whatever it was that was bugging him at home, it was pretty severe. Now, Longacre would come into the employment of John E. Watson, who was the owner of a bookstore. And John Watson not only took this young boy in and gave him a job, but essentially made him a part of his family. And they grew a lifelong friendship. And it was here at this bookstore that John Watson saw that young James, his talent lied not in selling books, but in drawing portraits and portraiture and drawing faces, as is seen by this self-portrait that James did when he was 13 years old. It's an artistic career, and had him become an apprentice under George Murray at an engraving firm named Murray, Draper, Fairman and Co. It was here that he would rub shoulders with Christian Gobrecht, who he would later succeed as the Mint's chief engraver. And during his apprenticeship here, he had a few successes, not without criticism, but his main first really important commission was for an encyclopedia, and he gained some success and popularity in that engraving General Andrew Jackson at the time and other portraits. And he then would go on to his big success in these early days, which was illustrations for the biographies of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And it was published in 9 volumes all throughout the 1820s. And he got really good sales from that. He got popular within the firm, and people started to like him a lot, notwithstanding his critics. He decided to propose his own set of biographies that were illustrated biographies of famous and important people around the United States at that time. He had sunk in about $1,000 of his own money in preparation for this project, which is like $30,000 in today's money. And he learned that a James Herring in New York City was planning a similar series. And usually when you hear about this sort of thing, when two artists, whether it be authors, painters, anything of this sphere, I've seen a lot throughout history that they hate each other instantly. They compete with each other. Whoever gets it out first is the winner. Early bird gets the worm. However, this surprised me, and it's one of the examples where Longacre and Herring got together, decided to partner together, and compile their work into something new. And it was really, really cool. They created the American Portrait Gallery, later called the National Portrait Gallery of Distinguished Americans. And it's this 4-volume series throughout the 1830s, where he sketched numerous historical figures like John C. Calhoun, James Madison. He sketched Jackson again, and they're really spectacular. I encourage you to look it up. It's pretty cool. It was also at this point in moving back in time a little bit to 1827 when he would marry Eliza Stiles, his wife. They would have, I believe, 6 children. their daughter Sarah being born in 1828. We'll see her potentially prop up again later. Everything was going really well. At this point, he had struck out on his own. He had gotten married and started a family. He was popular and had success under his belt. However, in 1837, we have the Panic of 1837. A side tangent for those of you who might need a refresher or are not aware. The Panic of 1837 was essentially a crisis that was the result of a very complex boom and bust cycle. It involved land speculation, unstable banking, and the shifting of international trade. When a lot of different contributing factors eventually in 1837 had a burst of an economic bubble, big financial collapse, thousands of banks and factories were closed, many prominent figures' lives were kind of ruined, and also adding to all of this, for those who don't know, there was also the cotton crash in the southern states, where cotton prices plummeted, devastating the southern economy, leaving planters unable to pay debts, lots of unfortunate human suffering. There was a financial depression, large unemployment, farm foreclosures, and Longacre went the way of the rest of the world at this, or not the world, but the United States at this time, and had to file for bankruptcy. He had to travel at this time from town to town, peddling his books to survive, and actually his wife and daughter kind of ran the business for him at home, doing the finances, and it was really interesting to read how they came together as a family, worked to survive, and did eventually make it out on top, because as opportunity came knocking for Longacre, so did tragedy, which often happens. The old acquaintance of his, Gobricht, died in 1844. This left the Chief Engraver for the United States Bureau of the Mint in Philadelphia open. Now, a lot of people wanted this job. Very high position. And Longacre was also looking into it, but John C. Calhoun, Senator Calhoun, was the one who kind of convinced Longacre to really go for it. I believe his wife also pushed him to do it too. And he secured the appointment, and everything again was looking up. However, he did not anticipate the amount of crap that he was stepping into by getting this job. The Mint at that time was basically run like a mini fiefdom, or like a mob ring, by director Robert Patterson and chief coiner Franklin Peel, who not only gate-kept the Mint, basically, but legitimately ran it like a mob boss family. They were running side hustles where they would basically steal government equipment and mint personnel to come work at Peel's house and private residence to then manufacture coins, metals, and tons of different stuff on government time, using government equipment and employees to then sell as his own personal business. And when these two saw Longacre coming in, they saw him as this huge outsider who was going to come in, mess things up for them, and, you know, he wasn't in the clique. And Patterson disliked and resented Longacre because of his sponsorship by Senator Calhoun, who he disliked as a Southerner. So there was political tension on top of all of this as well. What takes it another step further, where Longacre really doesn't get into the good graces of these two men, is he's not very good at sculpting coins and dies for coins. And you see letters written by Peterson in 1845 to the Treasury Secretary at the time, Robert J. Walker, that is really passive-aggressive, basically saying like, oh yeah, Longacre, he's a gentleman, and he has excellent character, and blah, 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 blah. But he sucks at his job, and he's, piece of crap. So it's like this hornet's nest, as it's been referred to, of like this den of thieves and a mob that Longacre steps into. And what makes matters worse, he's not good at his job, and there's nothing for him to do for the first few years, because all the coins that he would have worked on had already been changed and updated by his predecessor, Gobrecht. So he can't really go in and just start changing everything, and the government isn't commissioning him to do anything. Then, finally, in 1849, the government, along with the gold rush, Congress commissions them to make a gold dollar and a $20 gold coin called a double eagle. And Longacre finally gets the chance to design this coin. But even then, Patterson and Peel is not having it. And what they do is they try to commission someone, a Frenchman named, I'm going to butcher this, Louis Bouvant, outside the mint to engrave the coins. So now Longacre is on this, for the following year, he's pushed on a time constraint, and he has to pour his own money and time into it to push these designs that he's been commissioned for ahead of this Frenchman. And he works himself almost to death. His health deteriorates with how hard Longacre works on these designs and these dies. And then, as if he hadn't had enough, when he finally is able to submit them, Peel and Peterson had snuck in and sabotaged them, cracking them, and ruining all of his work that he almost killed himself producing. However, he had the molds and he had other ways to kind of save his work and submit his designs. However, the person that he needed to submit designs to for approval was Peel. So the person who had been intentionally sabotaging all of his work and illegally breaking all of his stuff was the person who he needed approval from for his designs. And as you can guess, Peel rejected him straight up, saying that the coins didn't impress him, that they didn't stack right, that they were engraved too deeply. Long list of things. However, other people who also went over the designs said that all of Peel's reasons were malarkey, that he was making stuff up. He's just straight up lying. To make matters worse, Peel then submitted a petition to the government and the Treasury to get Longacre fired, saying that because of this delay in the double eagle dies and the gold coin, that it was all Longacre's fault. He was lazy, he was bad at his job, and he just needs to be terminated. And Peel even goes so far as to promise Longacre's job to someone else, saying, "Don't worry about it, I'll get you this job, you can be our guy as soon as I get this other dude fired." Eventually, thinking that Longacre is completely ousted, Longacre, of course, is like, well, this isn't fair. What Peel is doing is complete bogus. So he goes to Patterson and says, hey, all of these delays, all of these things that have happening is Peel's fault. Well, of course, Patterson is in cahoots with Peel, and Patterson just straight up says, like, hey, I think it's best if you turn in your resignation and without delay. And basically just says, you should quit, trying to push him over the edge. Longacre thinks this matter over and decides, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to fight. This isn't right. I've worked too hard for this. I'm going to keep going. And on February 12th of 1850, he meets with the Secretary of the Treasury and basically lays everything out. He exposes Peel and Patterson and found out that obviously the secretary had been lied to about a number of the matters, of course. And surprisingly, I found Longacre did not seek retribution against Peel or Patterson, wanting instead to just let bygones be bygones and to work in peace. And much to Patterson's chagrin, because he complained that the coins were crap, basically. However, those coins, especially the double eagle gold coin, was extremely popular and highly favored by people all around the country. Even to this day, it is a very collectible coin and is very sought after. Some time moves on, and the drama just keeps coming. Patterson again writes to try and request for Longacre's termination as an outsider, and that, of course, is ignored, and he keeps his position. Tensions are building there, and then tragedy again, if Longacre can't get enough of hardship, strikes with the death of his wife in 1850. Then, a year later, in 1851, Congress authorized the 3-cent coin, a silver 3-cent coin, and Longacre makes a very beautiful design. I do not have one in my collection, unfortunately, but there's a picture. And actually, Patterson is on board with the design, giving it his approval. But then Peel, however, persuades Patterson to change his mind and decides that it's crap, and his struggles, Longacre's struggles, continue. Longacre, in a little bit of foresight, predicted something like this happening and submitted his designs to the new Treasury Secretary, Thomas Corwin. Thomas Corwin looked at Longacre's proposal and the new ones that Peel and Patterson had been trying to push on him, and he eventually chose Longacre's. And much to the chagrin of Patterson and Peel, getting another loss on their side of things. Then things start to turn around for Longacre, and things start to fall apart for Peel. Firstly, his cohort, Patterson, retires in July of 1851 due to health issues, and he is replaced by Thomas Eckert. And then Peel's side hustle metal business takes a huge hit when his chief coiner, Adam Ickfield, sorry I butchered that name, actually dies in 1852. So his cronies are falling apart. Then it was actually a man named Richard Sears McKillop, who was the mint's melter and refiner. He was a chemist, was the one who kind of came to Longacre's rescue as the one who really pushed for formal accusations against Peel around 1851 to 52, and exposed him with all of the side hustles that he had been doing and all the theft that had been going on and the sabotage that had been happening against Longacre. And all of this was brought right to Mint Director James Ross Snowden. And Snowden immediately fires Peel in what I assume must have been a really cathartic moment for Longacre. And then, with his enemies gone, we see Longacre step into his golden age of designs, coinage reform. Now, in order to fully explain his coins, this is what the copper penny, the 1 cent coin, looked like before Longacre changed it. Here's a quarter for reference to how big these suckers were, and they got really expensive. And so he downsized it to this. Now this is the Flying Eagle cent. This is, of course, both of these are from my personal collection. And there's some things I want to talk about with this. Firstly, the eagle itself is actually a real eagle. It's named Peter. There's a fun story there I'll talk about in a moment. But the wreath design on the back is something that caught my eye because it's a recurring motif throughout all of his, not all, but a few of his designs, starting with his gold dollars that he made earlier. And it shows mainly a few different plants, mainly those being wheat, corn, cotton, and tobacco. And I looked into the symbolic meanings, the aspect of why he would have included this. You have to remember, he made this coin in 1856, right when the country was being divided further and further leading up to the Civil War. And those 4 plants were actually the staples of the North and the South. Northern grains being wheat and corn, southern staples being cotton and tobacco. And it was supposed to promote sectional harmony in a divided era. And I thought that was really a good insight into the political happenings, the cultural happenings of the time. And also with Peter, the eagle, was supposed to symbolize freedom, aspirations of unified economic regions, and furthering progress. I wanted to talk about Peter for a moment. So Peter was a real eagle, and this is a really cool story that I learned. So back in the day, when Philadelphia was still seeing a lot of bald eagles, one of them would go out during the day. He would hunt and fish in the nearby rivers, and then at night he would fly into the Mint building to sleep. And he actually started being fed like chicken and things like that by the Mint employees. And the employees started seeing him as a mascot, and Peter actually grew friendly with the employees and tolerant of them because they were giving him food. And so he is actually the eagle that the coin is based off of. He's actually the model for it. Unfortunately, tragedy would strike with poor Peter. One day he was on top of one of the coin press machines. One of the employees did not see him there and turned the machine on, and his wing got broken. And everybody loved this bird. Even townsfolk loved this bird, so they tried really hard to nurse him back to health, but unfortunately that accident would claim Peter's life. And what the Mint employees did was they took Peter, they had him taxidermied and put on display, and he is actually still on display at the Philadelphia Mint to this day, and you can actually go see him. This is him here. And I thought that was both really cool and really tragic. But it was one of the few models of a United States coinage was Peter, and I think that was pretty legit. As a last note for these, I looked up the history of the language of flowers. If you've never looked that up before, it's a pretty cool little tidbit of history. Started mainly with Shakespeare, but the Victorians took off with it. And I wanted to look up the symbolism for the wheat, the corn, the tobacco, and all of that, because it's something that some of Victorian people that these coins were made for would have understood. I didn't find in contemporary sources really anything for tobacco or cotton. There's some information out there, but none that was dead set on being reliable. However, I did find actual references to the meanings of wheat and corn being wealth and riches, respectively, which really ties into the symbolism that I believe Longacre was trying to push with the symbolism and meaning of this design. And it was a design for this wreath that he actually came up with when he was designing the double eagle gold coin, and he reused a few times throughout his career. Next, he made in 1859 the Liberty Indian head cent, which it's Lady Liberty in a feathered headdress, which was a little controversial back then because people said that Native American headdresses are for men and not women, so putting Lady Liberty in one is a little weird. Misogyny of the time. Now people have a problem with the coin because it's a white woman in a Native American headdress. Honestly, I couldn't give two craps. I actually really like this coin. That's just my opinion. I think it's dope. The wreath on this one changed. In the first year, it actually had a laurel wreath, which, looking at the symbolic meaning across my sources for contemporary 1850s to 1900s sources, means glory. And then it actually changed to an oak wreath, which the same sources pretty unanimously say hospitality, but there were other meanings for it, like nobility or independence or even liberty. So it was very, especially with it being like the Civil War penny, it makes a lot of sense for those meanings, and especially with there being a shield that you see across a lot of his coins, and is actually, that shield is one of the surviving motifs and designs that even last till today. If you look at today's penny, you see the same shield design that he put on his coins, which I also think is a nod to the Civil War. Just some rapid fire designs that I really liked from him, because this video is already super long. This is a $50 design that he made that was not adopted. I actually really enjoyed this design. Maybe I think it'd be really cool to try and get like a private mint to make me like a token or a medal with this design or something. This is the Seated Liberty dime. He did not design the image of Seated Liberty on it. However, he did redesign the back, putting his kind of iconic unifying wreath on the back, so that's pretty cool. Now, this coin I did want to take a little bit of time on, because I do think it's really special. So it was made from 1864, so Civil War. and it was a 2-cent coin. And what's really special about this is you have his iconic reef, and you have his shield that he's used multiple times, with the crossed arrows and the olives branches around the shield, so peace through strength. But this was actually the first coin to have the motto that has survived to this day of "In God We Trust," which I think is a really significant message to push during this time of civil war for the United States Americans to represent faith during this unity crisis that they were having, and during this brutal war. I think it's a really cool message to try and push, and I never knew that, and I'm glad I have one in my collection. This last little bit is me just kind of showing off what I have in my collection of Longacre. I have a 3-cent nickel piece, not the silver, and I also have the shield nickel, as they call it, because it has his shield. I have both types. So the first year it came out, it had sun rays in between the stars, representing the colonies, and in other years, as you can see, they got rid of the sun rays, and I have both types. So I'm kind of just showing off, even though my coins look abysmal and they're not that great. But then, after years of working for the Mint and having this very successful run and making very iconic designs and coinage, motifs and mottos that live on today in our coinage now, on a New Year's Day of 1869, he suddenly passed away at the age of 74. From a runaway farm boy to a quiet master artist of American coinage, he's honestly helped shape a lot of our imagery, our symbolism of not only his time, but all the way until now, 170 years later. And as I've been going through my older coins, I've been admiring his work. I feel more of a special connection, not only with a sense of patriotism for my country, connection to history and my culture, but also to this man who before now I kind of took for granted. And I'm glad that I looked more into him and how he struggled and overcame his struggles and gave my world something really cool. But thank you for hanging out. Thank you for playing video games with me and listening to my story of history, showing off some coins. This was a lot of fun. Make sure to like and subscribe, and this video is brought to you by Peter the Eagle. May he forever soar through the skies.